Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at a system that has a little age on it, but you might say, why am I looking at this now instead of looking at this a while back? Well, Amazon recently had their Prime deal days, and this was one of the deals, and I was able to pick it up at a reasonably cheap price from a seller that, could actually ship it in a couple of days. And I'd been looking at this, but I thought it was a little bit too much on Anbernic's own website to justify the purchase. But I was a pretty big Genesis fan back in the day, Sega Genesis, and this looks like an excellent device to replace my Sega Nomad that broke down in the 90s. So we're going to take a look at the RG ARC-D. So before we open this box up, just a little bit about the system itself. It is a Rockchip based system, RK3566, 2 gigs of RAM, 4-inch screen, which these days I'm thinking 4-inch is probably the minimum size for good eye comfort. Not getting any younger after all. So 4-inch was kind of appealing over 3.5 or 2.8 or some of those other small screen sizes for playing Genesis games. There is some internal storage, and we can actually use Android or Linux, and got a 3500 milliamp hour battery. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Probably not in this video, but maybe later on. But dual operating system's interesting. It opens up some possibilities that some of these other handhelds don't have. I suspect, because it will probably be a little simpler, that in this video we're just going to look at the Android side. We'll save the Linux side for later. But this handheld should be able to handle, certainly, Sega Genesis stuff. I've read that it's had trouble with Saturn, but honestly I'm not actually that interested in Saturn, so the Saturn performance is not a big deal for me. Might be for some other people, but I'm mainly here for a handheld that's compatible with the Sega Genesis that actually has the proper control layout. Because I get tired of playing Genesis games on what effectively is a Nintendo or Sony layout. So let's actually get to opening this box. So the box here didn't come sealed at all. So let's see what's in here. This is even though the box is a different color, this is so far looking to be a pretty standard Anbernic loadout here. We got a little foam protector. Here's the handheld itself. We'll do some comparisons of this with other devices in a bit. But here's my handheld. RG ARC-D, made in China, all the usual stuff. Says it takes 5 volts and 1.5 amps, or greater than or equal to 1.5 amps. So, and on the website, on Anbernic's site, it actually says it supports USB C to C charging. So, hopefully this one won't blow up or turn the battery into a spicy pillow when you plug it into a regular charger. So we have an USB A to C charging cable. I'm sure there's some stuff under here. We've got a little set of directions here, which are probably the usual stuff. There's a screen protector, which we'll put on in a few minutes. The one from Amazon came with a 128 gig card. I'm not really a fan of these cards here. My recommendation is, if you're going to buy one of these, if you have the option, save a little money, get the one without the card, and install your own games. But it came with the card, so that was the Amazon deal. We'll take a look at it. There is actually a card in the system already. This is the Linux operating system card right in there. But let's compare this to some other systems and devices here. We'll make a little room on the table. So, of course, the big draw here is we have the actual Genesis or Mega Drive control system. There is a somewhat Sega-like round D-pad here. And of course we got the proper button layout. And this is actually even kind of in Sega colors here. So if you guys have been watching this channel for a while, you know I always get the black handhelds anyway. Almost always. Few exceptions. I will make an exception for orange. But let's look at this compared to some other things. So, of course, this is the easiest one of my Genesis type controllers to dig out, and this is a Pioneer Laser Active controller. The D-pads feel actually pretty similar in these. Basically, the Pioneer Laser Active was a Laserdisc player that could play, if you put the right hardware in, could play TurboGrafx-16 games, and it could also play Genesis games and Sega CD. And in addition to that, there were some Laserdisc only games that you could only play on the Pioneer Laser Active. But I have one of those, and it's a little bit big to put on camera, but it's sitting not too far from where we are right now. But essentially all this is a regular 6-button Genesis controller that's been rebadged by Pioneer. So you can kind of see how the ARC-D stacks up against a real Genesis controller. The D-pad's actually a little bit smaller on the ARC-D, very slightly. The buttons are also a little bit smaller. At least the A, B, and C buttons are a little bit smaller. But in terms of feel, at least just tapping on them here without playing a game, the buttons actually feel fairly similar. So hopefully this will be a good Sega Genesis experience. So let's look at some other handhelds. I do have another Anbernic 4-inch handheld device, and that would be the RG 405M. Of course, the screens are the same size here, but you can see that the ARC is a little bit bigger, and the ARC was designed a little bit more ergonomically, not much, than the 405. It also has stacked triggers here. Now, I happen to like this sort of thing, so now these are not analog, I don't believe. These just feel like plain old buttons. But then again, there's no analog sticks either, because this system is not really designed to play much in the way of analog games. I mean, maybe you could run some Dreamcast on here, but this looks like it's pretty much for Genesis, so I'm not even sure you would need the shoulder buttons that much for Genesis. But you can see this handheld is a little bit thicker than the 405M, and also has a lot more ports. One thing that might be nice about this is it has HDMI out and charging. So unlike a lot of new Anbernic handhelds that can actually output video and charge at the same time, 2 different ports. And of course the 405 doesn't have any video output at all. Now, for some other comparisons, here's a more modern Anbernic device, the RG Cube. Of course, the RG Cube has a somewhat similar D-pad. Actually, I think just messing with it right now, I think the ARC's D-pad feels a little bit better than the Cube's. It also looks slightly larger. And, of course, for Sega games, the button layout's a lot better on the ARC. But in terms of size, of course, the Cube is a bit smaller, just in the width, certainly. It's about the same thickness. And, of course, the screen is different aspect ratio here. A few more size comparisons here. The trusty Odin 2, of course, is way larger than the ARC in pretty much every dimension here. Now, the ARC is a little thicker in the body, but once you add the triggers to the Odin, of course, the Odin still dominates in terms of size. And, of course, the Odin screen is way bigger. Handheld weighs a lot more, too. The RG Cube's actually pretty... Not RG Cube. The RG ARC is actually pretty light. So, if you want to get a little weigh in here... I may not be able to see the screen of the balance too well down here, but if I just stick this on the balance, I get a weight of 246 grams as compared to the Odin 2, which is sliding everywhere, 424 grams versus, I got 244 this time, and 270 for the 405M. Cube is actually slightly heavier than the ARC. And of course, one other size comparison here. Here's the very dense Odin 2 Mini, 340 grams here. But in comparison with the ARC, these two are actually fairly similar in size. So comparing these is a pretty good comparison. The ARC looks to be pretty close to the same thickness overall. Of course, the Odin 2 Mini screen is a little larger here, but in terms of overall size, I think the Odin 2 Mini and the RG ARC are pretty comparable. Of course, the Odin does a lot more and also weighs a lot more and is way more expensive. But so far, so good with the RG ARC here. Now, what I think I'm going to do here is pause the video for a bit, and there is a screen protector that I'd like to go ahead and put on, because I don't like to start using these things too much before I put a screen protector on, if I'm going to put one on at all. So we will come back and we will take a look at the system and see if we can get it up and running. All right, we're back with the screen protector on. So one thing I'll mention about the screen protector is, relative to most of the other Anbernics I have, this one was kind of a pain to put on, because there is almost no tolerance here for the screen protector being slightly to the left or to the right. So it was a bit of a pain in the butt to get this thing on. Not my best job, but it'll do for now. So looking around this device, we have an F button, which is probably, things like to bring up Anbernic's interface and to do some other stuff. Got the power button here, got volume up and down. We have HDMI output. Looks like mini HDMI in this one, not micro. So we have a USB-C port labeled OTG, which presumably is where you're going to hook up an external controller if you want to use that. We have DC here, which appears to be the charging port. Of course, we have the stacked trigger buttons here, no analog. We've got select and start. On the bottom, we have a headphone jack. We have what they call TF1 internal, which is the operating system if you're going to use Linux. And we have another micro SD slot to put your card with your games on it and what have you. Nothing much interesting on the bottom except for a label. And again, they rate this at 5 volts greater than or equal to 1.5 amps. So presumably they're okay with it if you charge it with a regular charger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the Linux card. I want to see what the Android side can do here. Now, if you are going to use Linux, they actually do have one of these Kioxia cards, which are supposedly better quality than these. I would still always go ahead and find a place where I could get the Linux operating system, get it downloaded, have it ready, just in case these cards go bad. I know these are supposed to be better, but I had an RG28XX with one of these Kioxia cards, and the card just killed itself within, I counted, 9 days. Coincidentally, just shortly after I posted my initial impressions video of the RG28XX. So, I would definitely have for using Linux, I would definitely have a card on standby. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this card in here. for storage until later. We'll try out Linux later. And I'm going to put in this card that Anbernics supplied so we can see how the kind of out-of-the-box experience is. I can get this card in. There it goes. So hopefully we will find out that we have some battery power in here. If not, we'll take another short break and I'll go run find a charger. I'm going to hold down the power button. Let's see what we get. Oh, works so far. So we have the Anbernic screen. Probably can't see it on the screen, but a little power light. Oh, Android. Supposedly this is Android 11, according to the spec sheet from Anbernic. Now this is out-of-box experience, so I don't know how long it's going to take to boot up the first time. Now here we go. Welcome. English or Chinese. Start use. Sounds like the option to choose here. This looks kind of familiar. This looks like what I saw the last couple of Anbernics I've set up. It says streaming. I'm not really sure I would stream with this device. Most games that you'd want to stream are going to need those analog sticks, which this definitely does not have. So how long does it take for an ARC-D to get from 0 to gaming? Actually, it probably would have taken less time using the Linux side. Those tend to boot up a little bit quicker. But I did want to see the Android side in action here. It's going to sit at 50% for a little while. Okay, 90% at least, making progress. Configuration setup is done. Please click. This should have a touch screen, but it's probably going to want me to click. I'll take the touch screen. So we have a PS2 emulation. Don't think that would probably run that well on here. Maybe I'll try Star Ocean till the end of time later, but I doubt that Anbernic has pre-installed that on this card, so we won't see that in this video. Yeah, I think PlayStation 2 is probably kind of ambitious on this system. Whoops, I don't want to do that. I just wanted to scroll the screen. I didn't want to start any emulators. This looks pretty similar to a lot of Anbernic pre-installs that I've seen. So we have Chrome on here. We don't appear to have the App Store, which is fine because I really don't intend on downloading much in the way of apps anyway. Anything I need on here I can probably sideload. So what do we got in settings? So I could hook up the network. Don't nearly need to here. Got what, 87% battery. I always like to actually display the battery percentage. Last full charge 333 days ago. which I guess is impressive if that's accurate, but it probably isn't. So let's see if we can get into some games. Usually Anbernic has a launcher, so I wonder what happens if I hit this F button. Not a lot. Actually somewhat surprised they don't seem to have a launcher. So we've got Duck Station, we've got Drastic, Gamepad Tester. We'll take a look at Gamepad Tester. So the buttons seem to work. Of course, L3 and R3 are not going to do anything. A, B, C, X, Y, Z. No analogs to speak of. Well, if I click on Mega Drive, let's see what we got. There's some PSP stuff. So let me pause this for a second. Oh, okay. So let's see. This is how we get into their little front end. I thought the button would do it, but apparently not on this device. Rather than having to configure all that stuff manually. And I probably end up setting stuff up manually anyway later, but for now, for this first impressions, let's just see what Anbernic has themselves. Okay. When the loading is completed, please manually press the F key. Okay, whatever. Got to see which one is F and which one is power. Now we'll see if we can actually get to some games in short order. One thing I have noticed with my brief time with this so far is the system is nowhere near as snappy as it is with some of the newer devices. All right, well, let's try this. Since it's extracted itself. Well, it's showing there's some games on here, so it looks like it's found its folders. Yeah, PS2 games. I'm not really thinking those are going to go too well on here. For a system that's all about the Genesis, they seem to have a lot of Nintendo games on here, preloaded. Yeah, 1,045 games. All right. We're about Genesis here, so let's... Oh, I translated Langrisser 2. I actually have the first game. In the US, they called it War Song. So since this is going to be a Genesis machine, why not start with the classics? Well, so far it looks good. I mean, this should have no trouble playing Genesis games, but... Let's pause this for a second and have it so you can actually see and hear the games a little bit better. Oh, I was going to do the little green screen thing that I often do on this channel with the video output here from the ARC-D, but we're running into little technical difficulties, which I will show you. Apparently, the screen is somewhat weird on this device. So when you output to a TV, this is a wonderful oversight for the Android side, by the way. When you output to a TV, it looks like this. So the screen is rotated 90 degrees. Great job, Anbernic. So I was kind of hoping that this device wouldn't have the typical, you might say, Anbernic jank, but it definitely does. So if you want to play Sonic sideways on the TV, this is a good way to do it. Maybe the Linux side doesn't have this problem, but luckily I didn't really get this device to be playing out on a TV, but it does make it kind of inconvenient to record my gameplay videos in the usual way. There is one thing I noticed here. You can tell it to force portrait, which of course rotates the display here and rotates it on the other screen, but then you get this. So then everything is in the wrong aspect ratio. So I guess we will just look at the gameplay kind of the old-fashioned way. So we're back to a little bit of Sonic here. So far, Seems responsive enough. Oop. Not really trying too hard here, just running through to kind of see what things look like. Maybe getting a little bit of delay because I'm hooked up through the HDMI still, just so we can hear some sound. But there's Sonic. Let's try some different game here. Do a little Sonic 2. Since I've been messing around with Android menus. Oh, I didn't want 2-player. Somehow I've got these icons up here. Games seem to be running okay so far. Again, it should, because the system should have plenty enough power for playing Genesis games. See how a newer game works. So far, the performance for Sega games seems fine. Let's see what we've got for some one game I have to try. There's probably a search somewhere. No. I don't want to do that. Until I don't usually use the Anbernic front end here. Let's search. I think it was on here. Just search for that. There we go. Controls are fine. I'm just only kind of like half looking at the screen here. I just wanted to see how this one would work. I think it works pretty well. Let's look at one or two other systems here. So we have Lunar Eternal Blue pre-installed on here. I happen to have both of these as the Working Designs box sets for actually for the Sega CD and for the PlayStation. It's weird feeling like you're playing the PlayStation version of Lunar on the actual Genesis instead. Not that you could play it on the cartridge-based Genesis, but still. It seems to work so far, but yeah, long introductory cutscenes. And just as on the world from which they came, life was held in a... I'll just get out of that. Looks like a lot of role-playing games. Well, at least have Wipeout. Just turn the sound down just in case. Because I'm sure I remember this game having a fair amount of licensed music. So screen quality so far is pretty decent. I'm not noticing a huge amount of light bleed, at least not under these bright lights here. At this point, I'm wondering if this is even going to work. Oh, wait a minute. Probably not. It could just be more Anbernic jank here. Try it one more time and then move on if it doesn't work. Good illustration of why you shouldn't even bother with getting these preloaded Anbernic cards. But this is how this one came from Amazon. There wasn't really a choice of getting a cheaper option without a card. In fact, with the card, it was actually cheaper than buying it for Anbernic without it. So, yeah, I'm guessing this is probably not going to work either. Yes, yes, we know it locked up. Let's see if that works. Yeah, it must be the Japanese version. Oh, screen's rotated. For once, the screwed up screen on this screen orientation when plugged into the TV might actually be useful. That we'll get out of this. Not gonna mess with playing around sideways. But there are some but mainly I wasn't interested that much in PlayStation on here anyway. Mainly the Genesis stuff. So let's go back to Android here. All right, one more game and then we'll kind of call it a video here. So I've got Crazy Taxi for the Dreamcast loaded. I have the sound off because essentially it's full of licensed music, Offspring and all that. So we'll play this with the sound down so we don't get copyright strikes. So let's see how this performs just really quickly. So I don't think we're quite getting full frame rate here. Tried this once with the sound on, and there was some stuttering on the soundtrack. Wouldn't say it's unplayable, but I would say it's not going to be quite full frame rate for Dreamcast. Oop, let's go everywhere. We'll just drive through everything and everyone. Love how the cars just bounce around like they're boxes. Oh, looks like game's done. So, with the ARC-D, so what are my initial impressions of this handheld? Well, so far, it seems to be pretty nice. It actually has a pretty good feel for playing Sega games, particularly Genesis, Mega Drive, that sort of thing, and which is what I got it for, so I'm happy with that. I'm not quite as happy, at least on the Android side here so far, with the Anbernic jank here about the video output not working right. I did read that you can apparently hold select while you start the system. If it's already connected to a video output, then maybe it will actually put it in the correct orientation. But that seems like a pretty lame workaround for a device that has a video output that you should be able to just plug and play into a monitor. So that's a little disappointing. Again, maybe it is better on the Linux side. I will find out when I mess around with the Linux side of this device. As far as performance goes, of course, for stuff like I think Dreamcast, not Dreamcast, but Genesis Mega Drive, for Nintendo games if you for some reason want to play Nintendo games on a Sega, and for stuff that is relatively lower powered, I think this device probably has enough horsepower for that. Dreamcast seems to be a little bit stuttery. You may be able to tell in the video to some extent, but you can definitely tell if you have the sound up because I was definitely hearing some sound stuttering there. Again, we'll see what happens under the Linux side. But the performance is okay, I would think, for playing kind of the low-end Sega games. The key thing here is the screen actually is pretty decent for what it is. And nice 4-inch size. The device feels pretty good in the hands. Seems responsive enough. Of course, playing it here flat underneath the light so you can see the screen is not the optimal way of holding this thing. But if you sit back in the chair in your hands, I think you'll have a good experience playing at least Genesis and to some extent maybe Dreamcast games. I didn't check out Saturn here. Saturn's not really one of my systems of interest here. I have a Saturn and have a few games for it, but it never was one of my honestly favorites. I prefer the Genesis and the Dreamcast over the Saturn by far. And in the Saturn's generation, PlayStation was my system of choice. So I'm not going to say anything about the Saturn performance just because I don't do much Saturn. So not testing it here. But I will probably come back later and test this with the Linux side, see if it has less jank, more jank. But the only thing that really kind of annoys me about this system so far is the video out thing. And again, it's not going to be something that I didn't get this to play Genesis games on the TV, but it kind of made it annoying for recording a video. It's like, oh, what's happening with the video output? Oh, there's just some Anbernic jank in their operating system that means that you have to maybe hold down a special key combination just to get the video output to work properly. Now, would I recommend a purchase of this? If you specifically want to play some Genesis games or Mega Drive games like you have an old Nomad, this seems excellent for that, and that's exactly what I got it for, so I'm happy with the purchase. But outside of that specific case, I think you can find better handhelds for other classic games for probably less money. And although this was not terribly expensive off of the Amazon sale, but these days I would certainly recommend quite a few other handhelds over this for just general purpose gaming. This is a very specific purpose device. It actually has a good button layout, and it feels right for playing Genesis and Mega Drive games. So recommended for that. So far, not really recommended for anything else, because for everything else, like PlayStation games and what have you, there are certainly better options with the controls more suitable for those systems. So that'll be the end of the first impressions of this device. Again, I'll probably come back and do something else when I've had a chance to play with the Linux for a bit. But hope you've enjoyed the video. Hope you've enjoyed seeing an old device, but one that still really doesn't have a replacement so far in Anbernic's massive lineup of devices, the Anbernic RG ARC-D. This has been the Android side, at least. If you liked the video, remember to leave a like. If you want to see more handheld related content, remember to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions, comment sections are always open. Thank you for watching,